Hello again, everyone. I'm Joe Pryweller, Senior Director of Conference Content for Plastics News. I want to welcome you to this webinar presented by ResinSmart, powered by RTI, and organized by Plastics News. Resin contract season is right around the corner. And if you're walking into these negotiations with biased data, you're walking in blind. In this discussion, ResinSmart, powered by RTI, will show you how to counter outdated pricing benchmarks, anticipate market shifts before they're priced in, and walk into contract season with a strategy that's informed, confident, and tough to argue with. Today's presenters are Bill Bowie, Michael Workman, and Kevin Mekaru, all with ResinSmart powered by RTI. During the course of the webinar, you can ask questions by opening the Q&A icon that you'll see located either at the top or the bottom of your computer screen, and then typing in your question. Your question will be answered in the order that it is received after the presentation portion of the webinar is completed. At this point, let me turn the presentation over to Bill, Michael, and Kevin. We'll start today with Michael Workman. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate the opportunity from you and the Plastics News team to speak with the audience today. I know when I started in plastics about 13 years ago, several folks that would become my mentors, first thing they told me was that you need to learn, stay current with this industry, and the Plastics News is the where and the how that you do that. So really appreciate the time. Again, for everybody that doesn't know us, we help resin buyers achieve the lowest overall costs with the industry's only platform, combining a modern data analytics tool with hands-on supplier negotiation support. I'm Michael. I've been in the industry over a decade, Poly1, their distribution business and sales roles. So I'm on the sales side of the negotiation table. That's my background. And I want to introduce Bill and Kevin. Very blessed to have you guys as colleagues and friends. Bill, you've been doing this for 4 decades, right? Don't want to age you, man, but resin purchasing for some of the very largest plastic processors in the country, and our co-founder here at ResinSmart by RTI. And then Kevin, over 3 decades of experience in resin with Scholle, IPN, ITW, so on the buyer side. I want to give you a little bit of a flavor for what we're going to talk through today. We're going to talk through the rigged game. We're going to talk through how we're able to help folks level the playing field, especially during contract negotiation season. We're going to talk through some tips and strategies, and we're going to show you a process that you all can lead with and use as you enter this very important season. And I want you to stay tuned to the end of the call because we're going to have a surprise for everyone that's joined us. I want to start, though, with our title, Negotiating in a Rigged Resin Market, How Buyers Can Still Win. We've gotten a little bit of buzz, guys, right, on that terminology, especially one of the words there. And I thought we would hit that square on the nose. That's kind of our style here. I know we all have different perspectives when we think about that word. Kevin, I want to start with you.
Yeah, Michael, I think one of the most frustrating things for resin buyers is the topic of non-market adjustments. I'm just going to jump right into that because over time, price drifts from the indices, and it results in the indices not really reflecting what the actual price should be for a resin buyer. And the challenge has been in the last couple of years that we've seen these intervals of when they're initiating non-market adjustments become shorter, between 2 and 3 years. And that makes it very difficult to understand exactly where the baseline is, where you should be negotiating from for your business to save and get the best value for your volume and for your product. And that has really been the challenge that we've seen with a lot of the non-market adjustments. So we'll address that today. It is definitely a different market. I think, Bill, you give the example that you can look at a number of different commodities that are not resin related and find out the price today. Talk about that.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Michael. And Thank you, Joe and Plastics News, for hosting this session. Really appreciate the opportunity to share. Yeah, to Kevin's point about non-market adjustments and Michael's about the rigged game. And by the way, my granddaughter always says, "Dad, Grandpa, you used to have brown hair." So that tells you how long I've been in this industry. But when you talk about a rigged game, an effective strategy that you're going to hear me talk about over and over again today is talk to many and buy from a few. And when you think about a rigged game, you've got to make sure you ensure the information and the sources you use are calling balls and strikes, that they're not biased. You know, as we just talked about, if you talk about the indexes, and that's a tough job. I've always told people I wouldn't want that job. It's really hard to do. But when the indexes go up more than the market historically year over year, that's a problem for a resin buyer. If you look at high density injection with just one index in 2018, they made a non-market adjustment down of 23 cents. In 21, 26. In 25, 26. That's a 75-cent adjustment down over 8 years. One of the other indexes, 69 cents. That's money that you're pulling out of your pocket to pay for your resin. You know, if you look at low density film grade, same thing, 73 cents in non-market adjustments over 6 years. That's 12 cents a pound a year. I don't know a company that can be successful in that environment. Kevin just mentioned a minute ago, it's always been a struggle for me, having been in this industry since the mid 80s, to understand why I can go to the internet today and find out what orange juices cost, what pork bellies cost, what oil and gas, corn and soybeans and wheat cost, but I can't find out what resin costs. If you look at film grade, again, 12-cent adjustments over a period. The other index, another 12 cents a year over a 6 to 8 year period. When you look at indexes, you look at Plastics News, and Frank and I go way back, and I think Frank does a really fine job of talking to many. He might not buy, but he talks to many, and he does a pretty good job of making that adjustment. But as Kevin mentioned just a minute ago, even if you deal with the 12 cents that we're talking about a year, where the index floats up, but the market didn't, and then there has to be an adjustment down, and a resin buyer paid for that. Even if you get it right, like I think Frank and Plastics News do, you still got to ask yourself what Kevin just said a minute ago, and think about that. Where am I starting? What's my best price? Based on my logistics, how I pay, the volume I buy, who I buy from, what's my best price? And if you don't start at the best price, there's already a buffer built in there where you're paying too much.
Yeah, Bill, I wanted to comment on that because we were talking the other day, when a supplier comes in, they say, you're getting a price of somebody that buys 100 million pounds. How do you know that's true? I've never had a supplier that says, you know what? You could probably get a lower price than what I'm offering. It doesn't happen. It's a conditioning tactic the suppliers use to make you feel like you're right at the right baseline. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do you know where you're at the right baseline? By looking at market fundamentals.
Yeah, and I'll go back. I'm sorry, Michael, but I'll go back to the statement I made. Make sure you know that the sources you're getting your information from are accurate and true, so that you have a clear understanding of what the market's putting in front of you. And I think you guys will talk more about that as we move along.
We talked about the non-transparency of the market. Plastics has certainly been a very volatile market in the last few years post-COVID. And we spent some time talking about the indices. What's on my mind when I think about that word and what buyers deal with on a day-to-day basis, I think about under-resourced teams. I think about, we're very lucky to sponsor some really incredible organizations. Manufacturers Association of Plastic Processors is one of those. And I can't tell you how many times we talk to folks there that resin buying is their fourth or fifth or sixth job, right? And the ability to focus on that can be hard, Bill. I mean, some of that hasn't changed over the years.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. In fact, my partner, Garland Strong, originally hired me to buy resin for him at Doskasil. And And the poor guy I replaced was buying paper clips, envelopes, and rubber bands. And in the afternoon, ExxonMobil or Dow or one of the producers was coming in. And you think about, and Michael, you know this having walked in those shoes, the data that resin salesman that's calling on you has when they walk into your office globally. They know exactly what transactional prices are going on in their business and probably to a good extent what their competition's doing. And what have I got? What am I looking at to make my decision after I take care of all the other things, answer the plant manager's questions that he had that day and answer the CFO's, get that report done I've got to get done, and all plethora of things I've got to do in my day. And then in the afternoon, I'm going to come in and negotiate, in many cases, what is a multi-million-dollar contract. How do you prepare for that? What do you use for your base?
Which by the way, is also 80-90% contribution to cost of goods sold of the organization. So hence the criticality of getting it right. Listen, I think we've certainly painted a picture that everybody on this call that sat in the buyer chair understands. Let's talk through some of the ways to use data to negotiate better contracts. I want to paint the picture where we are today. As we enter the picture this year, it's not pretty. We've certainly had tariff impacts, economy that has been mostly paralyzed by uncertainty for one reason or another. And Q2 earnings reports, I mean, it was a bloodbath. We all saw what happened with Dow and LyondellBasell. Some of these very large companies are reporting weak earnings in a weak market. And so we need eyes wide open that that's the case. But I think, Kevin, you had an interesting point on knowing who actually has the leverage in that type of scenario. I wanted you to share some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. If you look at a number of years, most people start their negotiations in Q4, maybe some a little bit before that. But the market conditions right now are forecasted to be pretty weak for the remainder of the year in most industries. That is the best time to negotiate as a buyer of resin, because a lot of the suppliers are just trying to lock up contracts. They're just trying to get everything and go to the next year with locked in volumes in a very weak market conditions. That is where you have the leverage in those type of environments. If it was an environment that, for example, we had have a hurricane and there's capacity issues going into Q4, that would be a different story. But for right now, the market conditions are very favorable and the leverage is with the buyers to have those really deep negotiations. And along that line, I think one of the things that people need to understand is you don't have to make a decision with a supplier today. Suppliers will try to lock you down in, an early part of the negotiations. As long as you know what your timeline is, you can extend it as long as you need to with multiple meetings to get the best value, especially in a weak market.
I never really liked that, dealing with the seller side of it, Kev, but that is a reality, right? An effective strategy. We used the analogy, Bill, when we were talking about this of a wounded dog, right? When referring to maybe perhaps what some of the supplier action might be as we enter this season. And I know you had something you wanted to share in that regard.
Yeah, well, Michael, I rethought that wounded dog analogy with my puppy here at my feet. I don't think that's probably a good one, but maybe wounded lion is a better analogy. Don't get complacent. Before I talk about that, I want to stress one thing that Kevin just said. We have a strategy that we use. We call it pattern interrupt. Don't let the supplier force you into making a decision until you're ready to make your decision. Kevin said, use your timing. You know what your timing is. Use your timing, not what theirs is, because that gets you off kilter and that gets you out of your mode. You need to set the timing of how things are going to go down as you go towards the summary of signing a contract. But I can't stress enough to not be complacent. Back to the wounded lion in a corner. Look, these salesmen, and we've seen it many times before, they're being sent out by the office. Don't lose business and push margins up. And don't come back if you haven't. They're under a lot of pressure. So it's easy to think, well, they're struggling a little bit. There's an opportunity. They need my business. little bit of an opportunity to not take it quite as seriously from the buyer side because of the market conditions. Couldn't be further from the truth. Now is the time to be sure that you've got information, because information is power. And again, stress the non-biased information, and make sure that you put yourself in a position where competition is king. Whenever you can, use competition to set the table for the negotiation.
One of the things that we had wanted to talk through today was understanding when a deal is actually a deal, right? You hear that all the time. Hey, I got this deal on these cars for you. Kev, I wanted to maybe start with you. And back when you were doing this, right? How did you know when it's a deal?
Well, hopefully it wasn't when the supplier said it was the best deal, because that certainly wasn't the case. If you have a contract and a supplier, for example, comes back to you in Q4 kind of as a pre-contract sweetener to get the deal done, says, I've got these 5 rail cars, I can cut a deal to save you X amount of pennies off this, this rail car because we've got some overproduction this month. Sounds very attractive, and you might need the resin at a discount. But the question is, where is the deal point? Is the deal 5 cents down? Is it 10 cents down? What is really the deal? They're only offering it for a reason, which is they have oversupply and they're trying to alleviate inventory in this case. So you have to understand really what your baseline is. And we're going to talk about this a lot. Understand your baseline. Do your research, understand your baseline of where your business should be buying for your volume and for your modes of transportation in which you receive resin in. Those are all important points to kind of keep in mind as you go through this. So back to your point, understand what the deal really is. Is it really something that is going to close negotiation season or contract season within 3 meetings, or does that move it down to 2? I would say you really have to understand the value of that deal.
Yeah, I've got a story.
I know you wanted to.
I've got a story.
You were chomping at the bit. Go ahead.
Well, it's a good one, and you've heard. I mean, it was early in RTI, and we'd signed this client, and the buyer was proud. And one thing I tell buyers is, look, who doesn't want to hear that you're tough, you're a good negotiator, you're smart, you're well informed, and by the way, you're good looking. I mean, who doesn't want to hear that stuff, right? But in the end, you've got to do your research. So just like Kevin said, what is your best price? Where should you start that negotiation? But this story is just a classic. A really good company, growing, doing a lot of right things. So it wasn't like they were tripping over themselves. They were moving and shaking. But they probably bought 26 million pounds. And when we first started the conversations with them and set them up, and again, I don't want to make it sound like things happen in one meeting, because there's a lot of work and prep that goes in, that you guys do, that ResinSmart does, that we do for clients before they go into that first meeting to prepare them with all this data that we're talking about. But as the conversation started, he said, my supplier tells me I buy like 100 million pound buyer. Well, after all that prep, there was the first meeting with the supplier, the price was dropped double digits, more than 10 cents a pound in the first meeting. It changed their business. You think about the money you can plow back into your business when you're talking about your volume, and you're talking about 10 or 12 or 13 cents a pound that you can plow back into your business. That's training for people, that's molds, that's plants, there's endless potential for that savings once you drive that back into your business. I've got a lot of those stories, but we don't have time.
We're going to keep you on track, Bill. I appreciate you sharing. So one of the things that we've been emphasizing is not knowing your baseline, plotting your data, right? If you have history back to the pre-COVID levels is certainly one place to start with that, but it's also doing your homework beyond that. It's talking to as many as you can, Bill, like you said. It's expanding your network, right? That's another thing we talk about here at the ResinSmart team. Kevin, anything you wanted to add to that in terms of, besides, you can come talk to us, of course.
No, that is probably one of the most powerful techniques. If you have the ability to leverage suppliers against each other to get down to really what the baseline should be. There are so many people that have been, people that are buying sole source for either, maybe for some reasons, that are challenging, maybe medical related or automotive, and the qualifications are very costly. But if you are in a lot of other areas where, for example, food packaging, those areas are have comparable products out there. And yes, there is work that needs to be done for a qualification, but it pays dividends down the line for maybe not this negotiation season coming up, but next year's. And you would be surprised, as Bill said, how much your price will come down from your incumbent supplier because they know there's all of a sudden an open bid where, even better than that, a blind bid where they don't really know where the price point is going to go to, but they want to retain the business. So it's very important to diversify your supply base whenever possible. And I know, Bill, you've said even in circumstances where it's difficult, you've got some advice on that as well.
Yeah, even for the guy that's buying for medical grade, and he says, "I hear all these great ideas you got, but boy, I'm locked in. I'm not going to change resins. I'm not going to change suppliers." Are there other product lines you have where you could take that opportunity to do something unique there? Look, each negotiation is unique. There's different players. There's different market conditions, like we're talking about today. There's different needs by each party. What is your supplier? Understand what your supplier's needs are. Can you help meet some of those needs where it doesn't cost you dollars? Understand their business. Do your research and your homework on their business. Do your homework and your research on the person that's calling on you, that's knocking on the door. We use, again, the strategy is pattern interrupt. If I could lay out an outline of how this negotiation is going to go, because I've negotiated with this supplier for X number of years, and this is the way we do it, sit down and write that outline out, and then find 3 or 4 different times you can maybe change things up and put them a little bit on their heels because it's a little bit different. Hey, the president of the company would like to come up and talk about the market today. He hasn't talked about resin with you in quite a while. Hey, the CFO would like to have a couple minutes with you. Hey, my production manager is real interested in this new material you have. Things that might just change the negotiation to your advantage a little.
Well, one of the other things that goes into that when you're thinking through that strategy is also who you're giving the new business to, right? And how that's happening within your organization, ensuring alignment between your procurement organization and engineering and sales and new business. I mean, we've seen that time and time again, where awarding new business to suppliers that are holding price too high. Kevin, I know you wanted to jump in there and talk through that.
Yeah, there is so much loyalty at times to go to the same supplier for a new product, so it hasn't been qualified yet, and your leverage point will be so much better if you work with some product from a different supplier just to understand the supply chain base risk, if nothing else. You want to make sure that you have multiple suppliers. That's a great opportunity to go in and look and say there is comparable resins between your incumbent and a new supplier. Qualify both. It's the best time to do it. You have to do qualifications for a new product at front, where you might as well qualify 2 instead of 1. Save yourself a lot of issues down the line, and you have dual source in case there is a supply chain disruption, which we all know could certainly happen and does happen in the supply chain world.
I know another example that I'll just quickly share, and then Bill, I know you want to add to this. A couple of years ago when I was in my old role, one of our large consumer products or customers, I had my leader, it was contract negotiation season, walked into the plant, did a quick plant tour, stopped by the press. Hey, that's the machine that your resin is running on. And sure enough, right as we walked by, we saw the box of competitive resin that was not from our company. And back to pattern interrupt, right? I'm still convinced that they were not actually running that material, but even the optics of that, right, changed the entire conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't anywhere near that customer at that time, Michael. I have no idea what you're talking about. It's just about the negotiation to you, bringing it to you. If I was going to summarize some of the things I'd give people advice after 40 years, many of those being a buyer myself in polyethylene and polypropylene and engineering resins. I'd start again with talk to many, buy from a few. I just think if you think about that statement and really unpack it, you'll understand that there's a lot there to be I'll go back to that medical example again, where I'm locked in. If I know what the commodity price for that product is, and there's a 30-cent delta, and I look at what the generic resin price is for that, and there's a 35 or 40% delta, whatever it is, that's a discussion I can have with my supplier that changes the conversation. That just, again, part of the pattern interrupt. But know your best price, critical, just critical. Explain, as Kevin talked about, if you can, expand that supply base. New products, bring somebody new in, use pattern interrupt, know your supplier's needs. I mentioned this earlier. What can you do for them that doesn't cost any money? Payment terms, logistics, changes to order patterns. But what things could you do that might make their life a little bit easier and puts dollars on the bottom line for you and your company? If you have to tie to an index, ask for a settle up every month. Have a conversation about it. Your business can't afford a 12-cent float. Nobody's can. So have a settlement every month. Have a conversation about it where you bring data, they bring data, and you talk about where that settlement should be. And if it worst case, do it.
I would also mention, in addition to the settlement on the indices, pricing nominations, right? Pricing nominations are all over the table. You've got sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 8 cents, sometimes it's a rollover. And it's a matter of conditioning, supplier conditioning to say, hey, this is what we think it's going to be. Can you imagine going to your local gas station and down the street you see something posted on the door that says next month in October, your gas is going to go up by 8 cents. You go down the street in our gas station, it's going to go up by 5 cents, et cetera, et cetera. The point being, the forward-looking guidance of nominations is used within those negotiations to kind of condition what is really your baseline, where it should be. Because those events that would raise it, that amount, have not happened.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't agree more with that, Kev. I think that's a great segue. Let's get into the war game. I think that's the terminology we're rolling with here. I'm going to pull up the platform, and while I do that, just to set the table, Kevin's going to talk us through polyethylene as if you were back in the saddle again, Kev, running one of your prior company's procurement angles, and we're going to walk you through the story. As I share this on the screen, it's important to emphasize that you can get this information, right? One way you can get this information is our platform, but this is something that you all can go do and take action today. Kevin, I know where you want to start. We're going to start with inventory because I've had enough conversations with you to know that.
Yeah, inventory is definitely something that fluctuates. Obviously, there are changes within time depending on turnarounds or just variations in demand. But what we look at is not necessarily just the month to month, but we have a cumulative as well. Year over year, where's inventory? For example, the reason why we know going into this negotiation season, the market is so weak is because we are getting close to 1 billion pounds year over year of additional inventory that is at suppliers within the whole network. And that is a very massive figure. Understanding typically suppliers will increase for a hurricane premium in case something happens. But if it does not happen, that inventory is extremely high, even for an event to be happening. So that is one thing that we kind of look at. The second thing we look at is kind of where the feedstocks are. Ethylene, spot ethylene, natural gas. Right now they're pretty much range bound. There is not something that's driving them up. Crude oil as well is definitely range bound. And all those are things that we kind of look at from kind of the feedstocks level upstream to kind of filter into the raw material costs for the producers. So, and then we would take a look at operating rates and see what operating and demand rates are. Exports, we have this tool right here that gets pretty much everything in a tabular form. You can see how many days of inventory. Very simple to understand, but even more so, you can look at what it was last year or historically, so you can compare year over year. For example, if you're looking at just high density, you could just look at high density, what their inventories were, what their operating rates have been. You can look at the total aggregate as well. And so when your supplier comes in to have these discussions, this arms you with the information, the data say, look, your operating rates are a lot higher where the demand rate is. Or you guys are building inventory. There's not a lot of demand. Tell me why I should accept this 3 cents or a rollover when the market should be on the way headed down in this at this time of year. So these are the discussions we have with our clients on a regular basis, and we go through this and show them the export numbers. Well, for example, PE is highly exported, sometimes over 50%. That's kind of been range bound as well. It hasn't hit over the 50% yet. That shows a very weak market because a lot of the PE industry is built upon exporting a lot of PE to various regions in the world. And if you want to look at forward looking for polypropylene, I know a lot of people are starting to go into the P&L session. Look at kind of, this is our graphics for just, for example, polypropylene. It's just not there with just numbers, and we put exclamations, what our assumptions are for not just one quarter, but we go out to essentially the whole year and show generally where the pricing trend has been before that. We also have the resin pricing history in a general sense, what we consider like a fair price for a medium-sized buyer as well on there. So a lot of nuances to what your pricing should be. Mode of transportation, how much volume buy per year? Is some of it imported from, for example, Canada, or is it all domestic within US? Those are a lot of things we put in there, but also commentary as we go out forward looking to say, look, we're not going to have this as a stacked document that comes out on December 31st for all of 2026. We are looking at each quarter and recasting kind of our forecast, making sure that there is commentary to support events. And if there's a black swan event that happens, we put in what the results and the impact of that will be going into next year.
Yeah, I was just going to stack on top of that, Kevin. I mean, this is P&L season, or pick the acronym for your organization. Annual Operating Plan, AOP was what we used to use. This is so critical to setting budgets for 2026, right? And then I want to just key in again on your point of, we update these forecasts when the world changes and things happen. And that's important, right? To have a partner that is focused on this, that is helping you understand what the changes are and what that means for your business. One of the most common things that I hear back from potential clients is, we've got this, we understand it, and you may, but again, I'm going to show my loyalty here or my leaning towards Michigan. Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, right? For your Chicago guy, Kevin, right? Best at their craft. They want to surround themselves with folks that can help them get better. Tom Brady, he's got a guy helping him throw, helping him make sure he's eating right. So he looks like he does in his mid 40s, but yeah, that's what a lot of folks use this for, right? It's the iron sharpens iron, and you're getting better every day. I'm going to stop sharing. Bill, anything?
Michael,
I know you wanted to.
I was going to say to that point, Michael. We have another saying at RTI: those that need us the least use us the most. That's Tom Brady. That's Jordan. That's people that are already good at their game, but they want to be better. They want to be the best, and we found that over and over again. Those that are already really good at what they do, understand the market, do their work, they're the ones that lean on ResinSmart. When anything that we're saying to come off that we're anti-supplier. In the end, your supplier is your partner, and your is directly tied to them, and your relationship with them matters. So be humble, be respectful, but be tough, be fact-based, know your game, know your end game, know where you want to be. I can count on one hand, I think, the number of times in 28 years that a client actually ended up changing suppliers at the end of a negotiation, because both parties ended up doing what you do. You negotiated a settlement that you could both live with. So again, I want to make sure we understand our resin suppliers are our partners.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't get anything done without partners.
Yeah.
I could agree more with that, Bill. And just a couple of examples of how folks have utilized this process of working with the data and working with our team. I'll just share a quick story. We engaged with a blow molder on Plastics News top 100 list. And this is recent. This was just last year, 15 million pounds a year, polyethylene. Within 90 days, we had 23% back to the business. Yes, there was a series of meetings and it didn't happen overnight, but the only change was integration of this process and the people here at the team. No changes in suppliers or engineering or quality specs. What would $3 million back to your bottom line mean? For this company, it was not having to consider closing facilities, right? The reason people will work with us is it's fast. Over half see savings in 90 days. It's worth it. 100% of our engagement see some savings, and it's designed to be complementary. So we're not out here trying to help you move from one supplier to another. Sometimes that's the necessity because that's what the situation calls for, but it is, to Bill, your point, it's about building partnerships with suppliers that want partnerships to help you meet your business goals.
Yeah. And when you make the move, it'll be because you want to make the move. We've got a number of success stories. And Michael, to your point about the 23% with that client a year ago, I think our average is right around 19% with every client we work for. We've got stories like the one I shared with the 100 million pound buyer, but I think my favorite is that general idea that we prep, we do the homework and do the hard homework and help reduce that time from concept to success with the client. And the best stories are when the purchase resin procurement person comes out of that meeting and calls one of us and says, "You told me what to say, I said it. We worked it out just as we had planned, and they said exactly what they were going to say, and it happened just the way you said it would, and we got what we wanted." Yoo-hoo! Those are the best success stories, and there's a lot of those.
Yeah, Kevin, I can think of one that just happened the other week. Yeah, very well said, Bill. Very well said. I did mention earlier that we have a surprise for everybody. That surprise is that everybody that's on will get early access to our platform. So be on the lookout for that, and a complimentary consultation call with myself and appropriate member of our team. We're excited. You're going to get early access. We're getting ready to launch this thing next week.
Michael, real quick, I want to stress the point. There is nothing here that we've talked about that you can't do. You don't have to have ResinSmart to do this. We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago. There are nuggets that we gave you today. There are nuggets in that last webinar that if you apply them to your business, I can't promise you a lot of things, but I promise you will significantly change your company, drive hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, to your bottom line. And frankly, you have the opportunity to change your career path. Because somebody's going to get the accolades for pulling it off and making it happen. But in the end, there's one negotiation none of us wins. And being the guy that's been doing this for 40 years, I'm the guy that can say from experience, the one negotiation I've never won is time. I can't win it. So what does using the ResinSmart team do? It buys you time. It allows you to take that idea from concept to success much, much quicker. And maybe you can cheat time just like Tom Brady did to a certain extent. But surround yourself with experts that can reduce that time. ResinSmart's the only group that's biased for you. We talked about a rigged market or rigged situation that you walk into between non-market adjustments and the plethora of information that the producers have when they walk through your door, knowing what's going on the globe. You need support. You need experts around you. And these ResinSmart, we can do it. So have a fun contract season. Leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Joe.
Great. Thanks, guys. Terrific presentation and great showing of your platform and what you're doing, and lots of great information about what you hear and don't hear from the resin suppliers and how you can change some of the negotiations in your favor, I guess, anyway, with some of this. So maybe that's a big takeaway with some of this. Again, as I said, we have time for questions. And to ask a question, you can type your question into the Q&A box. Generally, you'll see it at the bottom of your screen, but you'll also sometimes, if you have a Mac especially, you'll see it at the top. And we'll just answer your questions in the order that they're received. One came in fairly early while you were talking. I thought we'd maybe start with that one anyway. The question is, why can't the indices get an accurate representation of the market pricing?
So, I'll take that.
That's you.
Over time, obviously there's market drift. Why is there market drift? There's a certain cost element to the commodity and the supply and demand during the month. But what smart buyers do, our clients and other folks as well, is they don't buy the retail price. They're buying at a discount, but they're buying at a discount using information and doing research. And they're doing it different ways, different techniques to do that. But they're having those conversations. For example, Bill mentioned doing a mid-year kind of check-in or quarterly check-in for pricing against the index. That is great business practice because you don't want to lose, for example, 12 cents, for example, over the course of a year of drift. You'd want to get on top of that real quick after about 6 months and say, you know what? I think we need to have a review. We believe the market is kind of drifted from the index, and we don't believe that the index is reflecting where it is currently. And this is our data. So a lot of it is just because the buyers are using techniques, different types of techniques, to buy better throughout the year.
Does that answer it, you guys? Anybody else have any comments there? Or does that sound good?
It's like I said earlier, the indexes have a really tough job, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's difficult to know when so much group that Kevin's talking about is buying in darkness. They're using data to drive it to stay accurate with the market. So it's very difficult for the index to know what's actually going on, because I'm not going to run and tell them what I did, because I'm going to use that as an advantage. So it's inherent in what they're trying to do that they're not going to catch what the best buyers are doing.
It's more of an average. It's not going to catch everything that a sharp buyer would have anyway.
That's exactly right, Joe.
Excellent. Another index question here. How much stock should I put into net transaction or low indices that I see out there?
So looking at both those figures, they're obviously lower than the index. They don't fluctuate as much typically. So the challenge there is they do drift as well. There are people that are buying more in the spot market certain times of the year to get a good benefit. And that's not always captured in those figures. It is more of a spot price, closer to a spot price, but it's not an exact spot price because each month the market conditions change and different producers have different deals with their customers to buy a certain amount of rail cars at a certain discount. And those spot prices go away very quickly if there's a weather event or something of that nature. So it's closer, but it's not exact. And there's still drift in that area as well.
Okay, great. Another question that came in. What's your point of view of signing a multi-year contract versus a short-term one?
Bill, do you want to handle that? Or you want
I don't see any issue with that. I think that, again, we need our suppliers. We need to have a strong relationship with them. The thing I would caution is in a multi-year agreement, again, have periods where you have identified that you're going to do a reset. You're going to sit down and have a conversation. I'm committing X amount of volume to you, and this is going to be the price we're going to start at, and this might be the indicator that we're going to use to adjust the price on a monthly basis. But we're going to do a quarterly. I personally prefer monthly, but that's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, and that's really where you need a partner working with you. But at least a quarterly discussion and about that price and where it's moved in the last 3 months and where we see it going in the next 3 months. But absolutely no issue with multi-year agreements. That strengthens that relationship between you and the supplier.
As long as the pricing is the pricing mechanism is set to talk more frequently than that period. I think that is just a critical point to drive home there. And that's not just in polyethylene, right? That's in all.
That's absolutely right, Michael. And I think I've made myself clear. I don't believe in an annual agreement that you aren't sitting down and having a reset and a conversation on a quarterly basis. And again, I prefer to a month, just because I've seen the 12 cents in multiple resins on an annual basis. And that adjustment comes either 2 or 3 years down the road, when now it's 26, or one case, I think it was 41 or 43 cent adjustment. I can't pay that and stay in business.
Great. This question I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Let's say you're trying to get a price reduction from a resin supplier, and you see something, news item in Plastics News, that says that this company, let's say, has a big loss in the quarter, or their dividends are cut or whatever. Can you address that in your negotiations, trying to get a price reduction from this resin supplier? Or how do you do that gingerly, I guess? Is there a way to do that?
You know, Joe, that's a great question. I would say that you have to look at, that's an overall macro view of what the company did as a whole, right?
Right.
Does it apply? What is element applies to the resin, the specific resin, and the location you're buying from? It could be a very small portion of that loss. Most times those type of losses are, they're doing some asset consolidation in the industry. There's a lot of things. They're doing some expansions. They're doing some write-offs. Has nothing necessarily a lot of times to do with the specific commodity that you're buying from that specific plant that supplier has.
Okay. So it doesn't take into account the specific instance that you're looking at anyway.
Yeah, and Joe, if I could, just throwing that out there is like throwing a grenade in the middle of the room. Is that really going to accomplish what you want to accomplish by throwing a grenade in there? That, hey, you're having a really bad year. Your profits are off. But if you couple that with, hey, we've been in an agreement 4 years ago, we were in this agreement, and I see the index adjusted 26 cents over the last 3 years, and I paid that. And guess what? We had a bad year in 2022. We struggled. Numbers weren't real good, and we were paying that. So now you're having a rough year. How do I turn that all into a dialogue that gets me what I want in the end?
Yeah, and built to your point, it has to be a give and take. It's just not we're taking. But obviously you have to give something to the supplier, a commitment of some sort. Doesn't always have to be tied to volume commitments. There's other ways to do that, but there has to be some certainty on their end as well. So a little bit of back and forth on those discussions of how you structure it.
The last thing that I quickly wanted to add, just to give another POV on that, is about your volume, right? If you happen to be in a position where you're up, right, that's obviously a position of strength. Or if you're consistent, right, and flat in the current environment is certainly better than a lot of other situations where folks are down. Having that volume and being able to talk through that as, you can expect this from me, right? And I have this volume to be, to have a constructive conversation, and then the new business piece, right? If you can marshal your organization in a way to be able to really count on any new business that comes out, having that be a part of that conversation really shapes it. And I think you can mention that in the conversation. You guys may be, hurting right now, but I'm a big part of helping you get out of that, right? If I've got the volume that's still there, or if I have the ability to grow, you can use that to your advantage.
Well said, Michael.
Here's a question specifically about sustainability related. Any suggestions for establishing pricing formulas for recycled content materials? Is that different than normal negotiations, I guess?
It's a much deeper discussion that's hard to answer that question on a webinar. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of new technology coming on stream as we talk. We're watching it every day. We're on top of it, building relationships with those companies. It's certainly feasible to do that, but it's a different dynamic.
Okay. Well, that's an upcoming webinar we'll work on with that.
Yeah, we honestly we should do another webinar for that, and
we should.
Don't tie it to an index. Definitely don't do that.
No.
Excellent. Yeah, more of a statement, but I'm gonna put this in the form of a question, I guess, anyway, sort of like Jeopardy or something. This person says negotiation should always be of mutual benefit versus winners versus losers. Do you find that a lot of negotiations on both sides anyway, looking to keep their customers happy while at the same time helping them mutually, or is that more of an ideal, maybe a Pollyanna type situation that's not always happening?
No, I think you can, Joe. I think you can meet both needs. I think you have to be realistic of where, you have an idea of where the margins have to be in your organization for when you're going to be purchasing money resin, and where the cost point needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you have people that may buy the same amount of resin, same volume, two different prices. So that supplier is getting more margin from one customer than the other. The question is, what's an acceptable level of profit margin for that supplier, for that specific resin? You have to dig into the details of that, but basically it's got to be a win-win. And I think you can get there. It involves a little bit more research to understand what leverage they have, what leverage you have. But in the end, I think it's a partnership. You're going to need them at certain times. They're going to need you from volume perspective.
Well said.
Yeah, and if I can jump into that too, that's why I talked about there's got to be mutual respect. Now, the example I gave the client early on where there was a double-digit savings, the producer might have walked out of there feeling a little disappointed like they lost. But in the end, they did what they chose to do, which was keep the volume. They just reset the price to where it really should be in the market. I always say, shame on me if I'm paying 10 cents too much for 6 years and I finally wake up and I find out that I shouldn't be paying that 10 cents. That's on me. That's not really on them. They're in business to make a profit and to sell the best price they can. Now, hopefully you build a relationship where there isn't that anybody taking advantage of each other. But once you do that and you reset, I don't know that everybody always feels like we each won in the end, but I think everybody feels like we have an honest relationship based on facts. And maybe from time to time we have to reset.
Reset being a key sometimes, looking at the relationship, I guess. More specific question about indexes. Do you prefer one index or monomer plus pricing?
Do you want to handle that, or
or maybe more information to answer that? I'm not sure.
That's a complicated one that really should be not even on a webinar. That's more of a one-on-one conversation.
Yes.
With the client. I mean, when you're talking about polypropylene, obviously monomer plus makes a lot of sense. Polyethylene, Kevin, you know better than me, but monomer's that's not really productive.
Yeah. I don't think it gets you to that. It's
There's
negotiating where the baseline needs to be.
Yeah. But again, it's something you should be watching, and it's something you should be having a conversation about. I don't know that I'd tie my contract in polyethylene to monomer, but I certainly would have that be part of my dialogue and part of my data set when I'm going into that negotiation or that pricing conversation with the supplier.
And I think I'll just say on the index part of that question, right? I think we've been pretty clear about our position that if you have to tie to an index, okay, but you should still build your negotiation in a way that allows you to true up on whatever cadence that makes the most sense for your situation. Bill likes monthly, other folks like quarterly or biannually, right? But that would be our recommendation. That is what we recommend.
Okay, great. We have time for maybe one or two more, and then we'll have to wrap up. This question is interesting. As an OEM, my multiple part suppliers get the same material at different prices because of the volume they purchase. Is there a way to fix this? Or I guess generally, obviously people get price discounts based on volumes and that kind of thing anyways. Is there a way to even that out, I guess, or work with that?
Yes. Yeah.
That's actually a good segue. I should mention what's on the screen is you can visit the website and get your early access invitation at ResinSmart.ai. You can reach out to Kevin and Michael. Both their Phone numbers and contact information is on the screen. And questions like that, or other questions too, that might talk about specificities of what somebody is looking at. It's better to have a one-on-one conversation and talk about some of this and see what might make sense on your end. So I imagine that the guys that makes sense. That recommendation for you is talk about individual cases by reaching out, I guess, right?
Yep, you're going to get an automated email from me, from us, with your early access credentials and the offer to have a consultative call with myself and one of our team, Kevin. If you buy polyethylene, we'll definitely talk through that in that conversation, right? We can get as specific as you want, and NDAs will obviously allow us to talk more.
Super. So reach out and talk about your situation anyway. I want to thank everybody for attending this Plastics News webinar presented by ResinSmart, powered by RTI. Appreciate a lot of great questions that came in and the great turnout for the webinar too. And I especially want to thank Bill Bowie, Michael Workman, Kevin Mekaru of ResinSmart, powered by RTI, for a great presentation, a great look at the platform, for answering your questions so thoroughly. Finally, you'll find today's presentation by going to the webinar section of Plastics News website. The presentation will be posted within 24 hours of the webinar today. And you'll also, as you mentioned, receive an email with more information from the ResinSmart team. So look for that also. I want to thank everybody again for attending today's webinar, and have a great day. Have a great Labor Day weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck out there. Cheers.